Now we're going to look at vein reversions and shape-shifting. Sigourney's reverted a vein on the inner side of her upper arm, coming up from the elbow and crossing over the biceps. The newborn has the same vein there, and it's definitely not a human vein. The one on the right has put out a number of lateral running veins on her forearms. I'm not sure if these are reversions or if she's just randomly moving the veins around. The one on the left is also putting out non-human veins. And in the top left frame, she's showing decompression in her right leg versus her left leg, with a different musculature as well. Angelina Jolie has put out a large non-human vein, decompressed and brought up to the surface. Again, human surface veins run lengthwise for the most part. This one is mostly lateral, going around the forearm. I've seen the exact same vein in person on a male imitation, so I know it's a reversion. Here are some lateral veins over the biceps and triceps. Definitely not human. The bodybuilder has decompressed most of the veins in his arm and moved them close to the surface. Some of them are still in their human imitation forms, but that double vein in the middle frame is definitely not human. In the right frame, you can tell that he's decompressed his forearm relative to his upper arm. The female imitation has put out some of the same veins, and she's also reverting the shape of her arm. Due to the thickness of the skin and subcutaneous layers, you'll never see the veins in a human leg. You'll only see this on Drax. Lateral surface veins on the thighs. Again, you'd never see this on a human. They can change the size, shape, orientation, and depth of their veins at any time. And when they receive their human imitation codes, the veins are remapped to imitate human veins. But just like the rest of their bodies, they can shift their veins out of their human imitation forms whenever they want. This statue of Baphomet has a snaking vein on its deltoid, and that looks very similar to the one on the left. That tells me that this is a reversion, not just a random alteration. Of course, Baphomet is a representation of the Dracs, and their god, Satan. At first, I had a hard time believing that the formation on the right is a vein. It has the shape of a vein, but it's so enormous that it doesn't seem possible. After comparing it to this other frame, I'm quite certain now that it is a vein. They both have that hairpin turn with a wider turn at the end, going into the forearm. This must be another reversion, but I doubt that's the natural size of the vein. That would be the vein of a truly gigantic creature, and I don't think they're quite that big. This individual is claimed to be a deformed victim of Agent Orange, which is the defoliant that was used during the Vietnam War. As you can see, the reality is that he's not a deformed human. This is a Drac reverting to its native form. He has the back hump, the extended elevated scapula, the chest bulge, the rounded elbow, and the curved forearm. All of that matches the newborn. They frequently exhibit shapeshifting under the pretense of deformities, diseases, and tumors. Obviously, they can't tell you what you're really looking at. They show you shapeshifting and hope that you're smart enough to figure it out on your own. Unfortunately, most humans can't think independently, so they always accept the official explanation.
You see, what we're talking about here is an organism that imitates other life forms.
More shapeshifting done under the pretense of Agent Orange deformities. The one on the left appears to have reverted his native ankle joint and bent it backwards. Or he just liquefied the bone and bent it. He's also reverting his right elbow and forehead horns. The one in the middle is doing the same with his lower legs, and he's deeply reverted the curve in his forearms. This comes from the video, the strangest, possibly creepiest video ever. It's supposedly CG animation, but I don't think so. It looks like shape-shifting to me. First off, you can see that he has that large horizontal tendon or muscle in the side of his neck, which we know is part of their anatomy. His neck also has the forward slant, and the pointed chin and jaw fold are identifiable reversions as well. Of course, the big mouth is also a feature of the native form. He's ungenerated his nose and eyes, and you'll see more examples of that later. I noticed that the macro blocking changes from one duplicate frame to the next, but the encoder wouldn't do that. He added the blurry macro blocks to the video before it was originally encoded. If this really is animation, wouldn't you want to put out the best quality possible? He intentionally reduced the quality so it would be less obvious that it's real. If he put it out in high quality where it was obvious, the video would be taken down. But as with movies and medical photos, if it's disguised as something else, they tolerate it. So what you're looking at here is a drac reverting to its native form that's ungenerated its nose and eyes. This came up on a search for dragon skull on Google. Everything else I saw were models and artwork which I knew weren't accurate to the native form. They all look like the stereotype dragons that you see in fantasy, with those angular lizard or dinosaur-like heads. This skull has more of a canine appearance, which seems to be a closer match to the newborn, and to some of the depictions of dragons in mythology. The artist measures the length of the skull at 70 centimeters, or 2.3 feet, and that's consistent with a creature that's 10 feet tall. Most interpretations of dragons put them at gigantic sizes, 20 feet long or more. This one gives a realistic size, so that suggests that this is based on the drac's actual form. The individual who drew this is obviously a drac. No human would know this much about their anatomy. Very few humans even know they exist. These two are reverting their maxilla bones, which has caused their front upper teeth to slant outward, where the tips are far out in front of the bottom teeth. That's how it looks in the drawing, so that's further support for this being accurate to the actual skull. We've also seen that the newborn's fangs have somewhat of a forward slant to them. The forehead horns wrap around the skull and end up pointing towards the back. That's the same on Arnold and the female imitation. The side view shows that the base of the horn is bone, surrounded by a cutaneous layer, and that beyond the end of the bone, it becomes purely cutaneous. So that vertical section of Arnold's horn must be the cutaneous extension. looking at the drawing, it appears that the back horns don't have bone bases, that they're entirely cutaneous. They're also much smaller than the forehead horns. This guy's back horn is quite large, but that's in relation to his human-sized head. When his head is fully reverted to its native form and size, the horn will obviously look smaller in comparison. You can see that this skull would fit inside the newborn's head. The shape and proportions are very close. The newborn's jaw is long front to back and relatively narrow top to bottom, just like the skull. As I said, the newborn is wearing a mask with mechanical eyes, so those aren't its real eye sockets. The real eyes are under the mask, positioned further back. The eye unit and hood have made the top of the head taller, but without that, it would probably look very similar to the drawing, except that the newborn would have the center ridge on the top of its head. Looking at this, it's clear that much of the newborn's cranial length is actually due to the extension of the horns. The skull does have an elongated cone-shaped cranium, but the horns extend much further out than that. I've defined the edge of the mask to make it easier to see the dragon's head. That's very close to the skull in the drawing. In this shot, you can see that the bottom edge of the newborn's jaw has a concave curvature, and that matches the skull in the drawing. The back of the jaw has a similar shape as well. Also notice how the mouth curves upward at the back. That's the same on both of them. A strong resemblance in the maxilla and mouth. Notice that the bottom fangs are spaced closer together than the upper fangs, but they slant outwards so that the tips meet the upper fangs. They both have that feature. The only difference is that the newborn hasn't reverted its fangs to their full size. As I said, the eyes and top of the head are different because the newborn is wearing a mask with mechanical eyes and a hood behind that. If that were removed, it would probably match what we see in the drawing. Its forehead and cranial height would also be shorter, though some of that height is actually the center ridge, which is the part that's making contact with the hood. The center ridge is probably cutaneous, so you wouldn't see it on a skull that was decomposed down to the bare bone. As you can see, a dragon skull has to go through drastic changes to take the form of a human skull. Compress the skull from front to back, and the height and width to a lesser extent. Pull in and reshape the cranium, maxilla, and jaw. Compress the horns into the forehead. Change the shape and orientation of the eye sockets, nasal cavity, and cheekbones, and morph the teeth into the shapes of human teeth. Now you have a dragon skull that looks like a human skull. It's still a dragon, with the same reptilian physiology, cells, and DNA, but the shape of its body changed, along with the characteristics of the cells, hardness, elasticity, color, and so on. That's basically how they do it, and they could imitate any creature in this way. This is a different type of dragon skull drawn by the same artist, Draco Aureus Solus, in other words, a golden sun dragon. There are different human races and different species of animals within families, dogs, cats, birds, snakes, etc. So I wouldn't be surprised if there were multiple species or types of dracs. This skull has more of a reptilian appearance, similar to that of a predatory dinosaur. It has those extra openings in the sides of the maxilla and cranium. and there's an abrupt angular transition where the maxilla meets the cranium, which is mostly flat across the top and sides, box-shaped. Another unusual feature is that the mandible has openings at the back. It appears that the skull sockets into the jaw, whereas on most animals, the jaw is socketed into the skull, under the cheekbones. The skull is also much narrower than the one on the right, and its structure is obviously less robust. Again, it's entirely possible that there's more than one drac species present here, and they may all possess this polymorphic ability. However, I'm quite sure that the newborn is the one on the right, because it has the wide skull and matching mouth and teeth. The one on the left just doesn't fit well with the newborn's head. This could be the difference between Arcturians and Orions, two different species of dragons.
He's telling the truth. I'd like to talk to him about this dragon.
The dragon?